Um, Thank you so much, very much for joining us this evening from Europe and from Africa. Good evening to you. My name is Regine Corrado, and I'm the board president of Women's Global Education Project. Thank you all for joining us for today's virtual book club. It's our first one, and we promise it won't be our last one. For those of you who are new to WGEP, our mission is to empower women and girls across rural regions of sub-Saharan Africa through education to build better lives and foster more equitable communities. We are thrilled to be joined today by award-winning author Abi Daré to discuss her debut novel, The Girl with the Louding Voice. The novel is a New York Times bestseller, a Read with Jenna Today Show book club pick, Amazon's editor's #1 pick for the best book of 2020, and an Indie Next pick. She grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and went on to study law at the University of Wolverhampton in the UK. As a master's degree in international project management from Glasgow Caledonian University, and as well as a master in creative writing at Birkbeck University of London. She now resides in Essex with her husband and 2 daughters. If you would like to submit a question to today's conversation, please use the chat function. If you have several questions, please pick your favorite questions to upvote your questions to make sure that we get to your question in our Q&A session. It is my great honor to introduce you now to our moderator for today's conversation, Andrea Thome. She is the author of the Hesse Creek series. She is a former broadcast journalist who lives in Chicago with her husband, Hall of Fame baseball player Jim Thome, 2 children, and I believe also some cats. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to pass the baton over to Andrea and Abi. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And hi, Abi. I want to welcome you. Good evening to you in England, where you are. And thank you so much for offering your time today to talk about this brilliant, I can't believe, debut novel. There's just no way. I mean, I believe you, but wow. And I have so many questions. I'm one of those people with loads and loads of questions. But I've got to ask you, I've heard that this was part of your dissertation for your creative writing program. That was the genesis of it. How did this amazing layered character of Adunni come to you? Tell us how her story came to you.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So as you said, yes, I wrote The Girl with the Louding Voice as part of my dissertation. I was doing a master's degree program, with a 2-year program, and part of your credits to get a good score was to submit a 15,000-word dissertation. Now, before I embarked on writing the book, just a little bit about my background. So I grew up in Lagos, as you said, in Nigeria, which Lagos is a city that kind of reminds me of New York in a way. It's very busy, very full of life. And I studied there, went to secondary school there. I lived in an environment that was sort of middle class to affluent, that had a lot of families that employed young girls as housemaids. So girls that would work for families, do the cooking, the cleaning, all the chores. Now, as a young girl myself, seeing these girls like me, doing all the chores, I had a lot of questions, especially because many times these girls were not very well treated. So you could go into a restaurant and know who a house girl was by how the girl was dressed, or the look in her eyes, the sad, haunted look, and the sadness around her spirit. And so those questions, I couldn't voice them at that time because I grew up in a culture of silence, in the sense that you don't question your adults around you, you just take everything you've been given. And so when I left Nigeria, I think those memories of the girls that I knew that worked for our family, the girls that I'd heard about that were very badly treated, followed me out of the country. And so then fast forward back to when I was doing my master's degree in creative writing, I had to submit a piece of work. I had a conversation with my daughter, who was 8 years old, one evening, and I asked her to help with the dishwasher, and she didn't want to. She was throwing tantrums. And then I said something that I've probably said to her millions of times, which was, they're young girls like you who are probably working for families like ours in Nigeria. And she said, working? Like, do they get paid? Can you pay me for what I do? And I said, no, not really, not working the way you see it. Is actually very hard work. It's actually work many times without any holidays or any chances to watch TV. And she then asked me, and she said, Mom, why would anyone send their daughter to be a maid? Like, would you ever do that to me? I think that really that question brought back a lot of the questions I had growing up, because I had questions around, why would anyone send their daughter to be a maid? What would happen to me if anything happened to my parents? And so that evening, I did some research around some of the abuse that had been documented over the years that I had not read or absorbed, but sort of dispersed, did not really register into my spirit. But that evening, I really took my time to go through articles. And there was this particular one about this 13-year-old girl that had hot water poured on her by the woman that employed her. And the injuries were horrendous. But I think what even hurt me more on a deeper level was the fact that this girl was reported as if she was just another statistic, as if she was a nobody. I don't think I recall seeing her name or anything about her or anything about the woman that did this to her. It was just this happened, live with it. And I think that evening I decided that I wanted to hear the voice of the girl, the voice of the girls that I knew growing up. What was her story? Who was she? Where did she come from? Who is she? What are her dreams? And so that night, knowing that I had to hand in 3,000 words of my novel to my supervisor in a week's time, I set her writing what became the first chapter. It has never changed from that first chapter of The Girl with the Louding Voice.
That first chapter is so powerful. There's a line that comes on page 9 where I was like, if this is what's being written on page 9, I'm in for something here. when her mother says to her, Adunni, you must be good for other people, even if you are not well, even if the whole world around you is not well. That's really incredible. Something else, you bring up your family, and I read somewhere that your mother read your book, obviously, and that it even changed how she looked at her experience with having, you said it's very commonplace in Nigeria for people middle class and higher to have people working in the home. How did it change her? How did it open her eyes?
I think because when something is the norm and it's such a part of you, it's really difficult to see what is wrong or what's right with it. It's just a part of you. And I think that's what happened with my mother. And so when she read, it was the first word of fiction she read in 30 years or so. She's very academic. And B, she read it during the lockdown, which meant she gave it 100% attention, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And so she called me that evening and said, Abi, I've never really thought about it this way. I've never looked at those girls as if they were an individual. I knew they were human. I treated them well, but it never occurred to me that these were young girls that had dreams. They were like you, my own daughter. And she said, did I do anything wrong? Did I, she felt quite bad. Did you ever see me do anything wrong? I said, no, Mom, you didn't, but that's what we all do, right? And then one of my best friends called me. She was in tears. She was crying. And she has a daughter that is the same age as my daughter. And she said, Abi, I never knew our housemates' birthdays. And I would never miss my own daughter's birthdays right now. And then again, my brother, so many people, my brother did the same thing. He sent out a message around his WhatsApp group. And he said, just checking to his Nigerian friends, how many of you knew your housemate's surname? How many of you knew their birthdays? And it all came back with, no, we didn't. So, and I think that's what happens when something is such a part of you, such a norm. It's very difficult to step away and look within and look back and see what's wrong with it. And I think that's what I was trying to do with the story.
Wow, powerful. Well, and you created this fictional village, which is where the story begins. And for someone who didn't live in a village, I imagine this village is very much like the villages that Women's Global Education Project works in Senegal and Kenya. And there had to be so much research that went into that. What aspects of village life in particular were important for you to really get across in the book?
I think for me, what struck me was the fact that there was this perceived view of people that lived in villages before I knew a lot about villages, before I did my research, was the fact that people that live in villages must live a very miserable life, not very happy, and all of that. But I think because my mother had a job that took her around Nigeria quite often by road, once in a while, I'll go with her on these journeys and we'll pass through villages as we go into the cities. Well, my mother worked in taxation. So as we pass through the villages and go into the cities where the tax offices were located, I would always be fascinated by the joy on the faces of the people that we saw in the villages, how they would run to the cars and flock our cars and ask for money or whatever it was. And they just seemed they seemed to live a very simple life. And I felt that I hadn't seen that in fiction. I wanted to show the beauty that could be in village life, but of course also show that there's deprivation and the fact that many villages and even areas across the world that are not very well developed because there's a view that those areas do not deserve that investment.
There's so much. This book focuses on child marriage, forced labor, gender-based violence, a lot of heavy issues. But boy, it's amazing to me that Adunni is able to be such an optimist throughout most of this book. And I just wonder, is it because she has allies or forms of allies along the way from very early on in the book, her younger brother, and then one of her sister wives befriends her, even Big Madam, which she starts to try, you see shades of her try to want to help, but then she sort of pulls back because maybe that's not who she really is. I don't know. And then Tia Dada, in a way, even though she maybe has a little savior complex, I've heard you refer to that, which I thought was really interesting, food for thought. Is it because she had allies? Is that why she's able to maintain positivity throughout the story?
I think it certainly helps, but I think that I try to create Adunni as a character that would be optimistic. And I didn't start out like that, to be honest. I started out with writing this story and I ended the story and I felt that the character I had created was not very pleased with what I'd done with her. I felt that she wanted to show herself as she really was. And I had manipulated her to be somebody who cried a lot. So the first draft was a lot of tears, a lot of self-pity. And it felt like Adunni was saying, no, that's not who I am. So you've got to do some more work here, Abby. You've got to do work here. So I went back to change that to sort of highlight her optimistic nature, her very, very happy, go-lucky attitude, if you like. But of course, the people that helped Adunni did have a huge impact in how she saw life. And because she was always the kind of girl that saw glass half full as opposed to half empty, I think that helped as well. So it was a combination of those people and who she is as a character.
You know, the way this book is written, it's written first person. You really had to inhabit this character. It's written in what is, I guess we would refer to as non-traditional English, the beginning of the book. And then you see as she evolves as a character and grows, the language also involves. How did you, I read a little that you pulled from different things in your life, from your daughter, but a phrase that caught my ear, and I jotted it down somewhere, that you dropped into your spirit to write this. And I think that's so beautifully said. Tell us how you gave her the voice that you gave her.
I think it was just, like I said, that night I was thinking, I've got to hand in 3,000 words. I had been given feedback from the work I had shared in class for my dissertation that I was a little bit lacking when it came to creating characters that were memorable. So I think so I was told that by everyone. I think
one person's opinion, by the way, one person's opinion.
I think I'm the kind of person that really, really wants to learn. I want to learn from my mistakes. I think I really took that on board and said to myself that the next time I'm going to write a piece, I didn't even know it was going to be the gold Latin voice. I'm going to write a piece and I'm going to try and focus and create a character that would be memorable to me and to my supervisor. Because at the time, I wasn't even thinking about publication. It was a far distant dream. And so that evening, as I laid down, I just heard it felt like a voice in my heart that just said, this morning, Papa called me inside the parlor. And I typed that. I remember typing that. And after typing that, I was lying on my bed and I could not stop. I literally could not. It felt like I'd been carrying that voice around with me for years and just waiting for the moment to be let out. That's the way it felt to me. And after that, I just didn't stop, to the point when I had to finish the book first before I could rework on fixing how her English, as she got better at speaking the language.
She says at one point, at first it's a real source of pride for her to be able to speak English in the book, but later she says English is only a language. Nothing about it is special. Nothing about it makes anybody have sense. I think that's really interesting. What do you want to get across to traditionally English-speaking readers about that moment?
I think that came a little bit from my life. Of course, Nigeria was colonized by the British, but I don't think this is a public knowledge as such. A few people know it, but not a lot of people know it. Mm-hmm. And so when I came to the UK to study, I had formed. I was a young woman. I had studied 1 year of French in university in Lagos. I spoke English all my life. But in coming to the UK, I remember I got a job. It was one of my first jobs. I was working for a jeweler. And every time a customer came in and I went up to serve them with confidence and talking about the knowledge I'd amassed on jewelry, on diamonds and watches, once in a while you get that odd, oh my goodness, you speak very good English, you must be very smart. And I just, it really, really always baffled me. And so when I came to writing this book, I felt that, look, I was going to, of course, write her story in non-standard English, but of course, make her incredibly smart, because there's this perceived notion that the fact that you speak very good English means you're very smart, and it's just a language, right? There's superiority that comes with well-spoken English language that just, I find it very, very interesting.
I thought that was fascinating. Well, so now that with this COVID pandemic, everything in the world has shifted and changed, and has really even added challenges for girls. There are some estimates that 20 million more girls are going to drop out of school now by the time that this pandemic is over. Why do you feel that it's so important to raise about education? Education is the key. Why is it so important that was that your primary reason for writing this, or did that just kind of come about as a byproduct of telling the story?
I think that when you look at the statistics, and I like statistics, but I prefer the human view because I'm a storyteller. But when you look at the statistics out there, you said 20 million just in the last 18 months. There are over 131 million girls out of school. It's probably risen now. When you just look at the sheer amount, and because girls are seen as a commodity, especially in areas where there are traditional beliefs and there's a culture that sees girls as belonging in the kitchen or in the bedroom, I think it's very heartbreaking. For me, I was raised by my mother, and she put it in me at a very young age how it was important for me to get the foundation right. I always say to people that education doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a multimillionaire, but it means you're going to be wealthy in intelligence and the ability to make conscious, informed decisions about your life. And that's what this is about. This is about allowing these girls to make decisions. If they choose, after getting an education, to not want to do anything with it, that's fine, but they've made an informed decision. And that's what I'm about. I'm about making sure that young girls across the world, and boys, of course, but girls especially, because they're the ones that right now are disproportionately affected, are given a chance to be able to make a decision about their lives and what they want to do with it.
Well, and they're punished in so many ways for having lauding voices in many places. So you even have to overcome that hurdle as well to get them to override the fear that's built in, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How was this book received in Nigeria? I'm curious.
So I remember that the night before it was published in the UK, which was the same time it was going to be published in Nigeria, I remember saying to my husband that I think I want to withdraw right now. I think I can't go with this because I'm really scared. And he said, you can't withdraw. It's just a few people that are going to kill you. Just a few people going to, cut your head off. But it was well received. I was pleasantly surprised that I was sat in a few book clubs. I remember this particular book club with about 60 Nigerian women who were saying to me, Abi, because of this story, I'm incensed. I'm thinking, how have I sat here for this long, blinded to what has been going on? Because of this story, I'm going to knock on my neighbor's door and I will challenge them and say, the young girl you have there should not be there. She should be in school. And so that was well received. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, a lot of, great encouragement from the community. So it's been wonderful to hear that and to see it happen.
It's incredible to see the power of fiction. Nonfiction is important, but to put it into a story form where people can really remove themselves a little bit and see it as a story and then take something away at the end is really powerful. What is next? I read somewhere that you're Adunni's voice, that you've been grieving this character because and I can relate to that when you're that into a character, particularly in first person, you've inhabited them. It's difficult to let go. What was the process of grieving her like, and what's next?
So I had lived with her for 3 years, and it felt like she was my third daughter, actually the first child, because she's older than the others. And I remember the day that my wonderful editor emailed me and said, Abi, that's it. So she'd asked me for some edits, which I loved making. And I sent it to her, and I was hoping she's going to come back and say, Abi, can you do more edits? And she came back and said, Abi, that's it. We're done. Like, it's moving off now. And I remember just closing my laptop and sitting on the floor and just crying. I was just crying because I felt like it was over, that I could no longer have that relationship with Adunni. And it took a long time. I remember that for 2-3 weeks after that, I couldn't write a single word of fiction that wasn't in her voice. I couldn't even send proper emails. Like, I would start typing an email in her voice and I'll then delete it and then type properly. So it was I'd never experienced anything like that in my life of writing. And so it meant that I also couldn't write anything else in first person. So I've had to work on something else as third person, because it's been really difficult to detach from Adunni's story. And I couldn't write a sequel either. So yeah, it was tough.
Do you consider the ending that you gave her a happy ending? And what do you think happens to her when the book closes?
So it's definitely a better ending than what I gave her in first draft.
That's good.
So it's an ending that I think it's a kind of ending that I was trying to say to people that were in Big Madam Kia's point of shoes, to say this is possible, that you can change your life by a little bit of kindness. That was the kind of ending. I was deliberate about that ending. Was it a happy ending? For Adunni, it was much better than anything else she has been through. And I see her now in a dorm somewhere, reading some books and just, living her life and just thriving. I see her thriving and doing very well.
I think it was in the first few pages, it took me a minute to get into the rhythm of the language. And then once I did, it was like I didn't even notice it. It was just, and then by the end of the book, I was like, part of me was sad that I missed that innocence of her early character, but it's still there. It's still there. And I would love to hear how her voice evolves, but that's part of reading. You just have to imagine it as the reader. We have a bunch of questions rolling in. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a peek here and see. The first question is, growing up where you did in the big city, how did you view rural communities? And did you sometimes leave Lagos to go to the country, like so many of us do, to go to who live in London, New York, Chicago, etc.?
Yes, I mean, like I said, a lot of us viewed the rural areas as if they were kind of deprived. But interestingly, that was me. A lot of my friends had ginormous family homes in what we call the villages. So you find a lot of especially families that have quite a few children and grandchildren, all that. You find somebody building a mansion in the village, and every Christmas they would go home. We call it home. They would go home and be with the family. I never had that, because I grew up with my mother, and who was very, very busy, sort of 9-to-5er, who didn't have that time to do that. But a lot of my friends did that, and I kind of envied their lives, because I really wanted to have that feeling of going to the village. And they lived in mansions, but they would come out from the gates of their mansions and mix with the villagers and just have that wonderful bond. And I love that. But then, like I said, just going in cars with my mother and just seeing all of that was just a kind of raw beauty that I love and cherish. And I'm looking forward to going back as soon as I can. Actually, I was saying to my brother that I just want to go back and just be around some of the villages and just get another feel for what it's like there. I've never done that before, to just stay in a hotel there and just breathe in the air.
Yeah, with new eyes. That's really interesting. Okay, so there are a couple other questions here. Have you made puff puffs? Are they hard to make?
I tell you, my cooking, especially for puff puffs, is horrendous. I bought this ready-made, like the mix, right? It was flour and sugar. I got that wrong. I could not believe it was rock hard. No, but my sister-in-law makes amazing puff puffs, and I think that's where that came from. She's a caterer and she makes amazing puff puffs, and every time she makes them, I just can't stop eating them. They're not good for the waist, but they're amazing.
Nothing is good for your waist anymore, I'm convinced. Tell me a little bit, as a writer, I'm curious about your process. So do you outline completely? Do you start with character development? Your characters are so rounded out and they're so complex. And I mean, you really see the shadow side and the light side of your characters, which I love. What's your process from A to Z?
Oh, wow. I try to outline. I once wrote 100,000 words without outlining, and it's sitting in my do not delete folder, because I can't just I can't do it to my writing. I can't just get rid of it like that. So I learned from that experience of those 100,000 words that have gone nowhere, and I try to outline now. But then what tends to happen, is that you will deviate from that because your character takes a life of its own. But in terms of giving the character, trying to make them rounded, it's difficult. And I try to say for each character. So I have like a spreadsheet for each character, and I try to have their pros and cons, the pluses and negatives, and I try to show that in their day-to-day life. And I know it's easier said than done, but it takes a lot of rewriting and going over and just tweaking, responses and attitudes and dialogue and speech patterns and all of that to make sure that each character is distinct. And I think it was slightly easier in the Go the Lauding Voice than it is in what I'm trying to work on now. So, you learn every day with a new book, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning and trying to get better at it every day.
This question comes up, and I always love to hear what other writers say. What is your advice to some of us who would like to write a novel, but who don't know how to go about it?
Well, I think that, gosh, for me, the storyteller instinct was in me from when I was 5 years old. I hope that the person asking this question has that desire to tell stories. But I also hope that you read a lot of books. Reading a lot of books, I think, is one of the quickest ways to get your brain into thinking of how to create stories. Read books that are similar to the kind of stories you want to tell. And I think that it also helps to learn and many people argue that you can't learn how to write, but I think you can learn how to improve your writing. I always advocate watching sort of YouTube videos from authors that are giving sort of advice on that. I attended a master's degree because I wanted to try and write better. And then just sitting down and trying to do the work. It's really, a lot of people say to me, I want to write a book, but they've actually never sat down to type the sentence. So if you can't type, and then handwrite and see what happens with it. But it's constantly reinventing yourself and giving yourself the knowledge that you need to get it done, and then doing the work.
Somebody, here's another question. I listened to the book rather than reading it, and I'm still grateful I did. The reader was fantastic. While listening, I came to view the language as another character itself. That's interesting. Do you have any feelings regarding reading versus listening to your book?
No, I don't listen often, maybe because I'm a writer. I find that when I read, it connects with a different part of my brain. And because I'm such a terrible multitasker, when I'm listening, I'm always doing something else. And that's why. But I listened once to, I think it was the audio book of The Color Purple when I was writing The Girl with the Lauding Voice. And it connected to me on a different level. It was incredible, the kind of power that just hearing the character's voice fill my living room that evening. It was just an incredible, I put it on YouTube actually, and I just put it off the volume. I sat down in the dark and I just listened, and it was incredible, the power. So, I would advocate for both, but I tend to read more than audiobooks.
I was having a discussion the other day about literature that's in schools, in high schools in particular, with a friend, and how it's the same. There are some wonderful classic books that kids study these days, but they're the same books that I studied, the kids are studying today, and there's so much great newer fiction. Who do you think? Who do you want to read this book? Who do you most want to read it? And do you think it would do well in a high school curriculum?
Oh, I hope it will. I hope that especially when you are in a position of privilege, and a lot of people don't realize they're in a position of privilege until you hear another person's story. And I think that even I, the author, writing The Girl with the Lauding Voice, I had many moments of guilt. I had moments where I would pause in writing and think, wow, I had the good life, right? And I didn't bargain for it. I didn't ask for it. I found myself there. And it's important for us to understand that where you are, the family you're born into, the country you're born into, the color, you find yourself there. You didn't bargain with anyone and just, decide to pick. There's no buffet anywhere for you to choose what you want to become, especially as a baby. As you're older, you can make those choices. And so I think the story of Adunni is the kind of story that I feel can help a lot of us develop a bit of empathy when you hear stories of young girls and when you see the news and you just quickly, many of us I used to do that. When something comes up on the news, I just flip it and think, oh, again, there's war again. But then when you read a novel about war and you understand the impact and what it does and how it devastates lives, you will pause a little bit and listen and have a bit more empathy. So that's what I hope this would do.
Of course, this has a political, it can't, and a novel like this can't not have political overtones or undertones. Do you believe that your novel, someone asks, might help to influence legislation to focus on protecting girls from this domestic slavery, if it is that prevalent?
I really, really hope so. Right. Because I feel that it starts with that. It doesn't end there, but it starts there. It starts there when our lawmakers begin to sit up and take it seriously when people are arrested and they are punished for hiring a young girl or abusing a young girl or a young boy, right? But right now, what we find is impunity. There are laws in place, but nothing happens to those who break the law. So I really hope that hearing the story gives a different view to the lawmakers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so someone says it's beautiful. You will get to share your writing with your loved ones. At what age will you allow your daughter to read your book? And what age do you feel young girls should be exposed to stories like these?
I think it's difficult to tell what age young girls should be exposed to stories like this. I get questions from teachers all the time, and I'm like, I think they should read the book and make an informed decision based on their classrooms. For my daughter, I've said to her that when she's around just close enough to the age of Adunni, and she knows the story, she knows she inspired the book. But I think there's some themes there that I would love to be able to take the time to explain to her mind, to her at the point where her mind is able to deal with it and understand it. And I think it's really about that whoever is sharing this book is able to explain it to a younger person, and they can have a nice conversation around this and tell the truth and hard truths that is the story that I've told.
I think we have time. Yeah, we do, for one more question. Will you, and you've sort of answered this, but would you consider writing the rest of Adunni's story, including how she goes back to help girls after she finishes her education? So maybe way in the future, maybe not your next project, but maybe down the road, would you consider it?
My mother thinks I should, and I really listen to my mom. She's written an email with exactly what she thinks needs to happen to every single character.
Oh,
so she
a collaboration, maybe.
She strongly thinks that Adunni should work for the United Nations. So I'm listening, and I'll see. But again, it has to come. It has to come from a place of a longing for me to tell that story again. And I would not force it into place. I would wait for it to happen naturally and to be organic. And when it does, then I will give my heart into it. And yes, it will be in the future.
Well, I for one will be in line for that. No pressure. But I have to tell you, I was gifted this book to read by Tria, my friend who brought me to this day. And I loved it so much. I went out and not only bought a copy from my local bookstore, which I feel it's important to support local booksellers, but I ordered several copies as well for friends to give out, because I think it's such an important read. So thank you so much for pouring your soul into this, for being here today. And I think I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Amy Maglio, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about Women's Global Education Project, and then we'll revisit in just a few minutes. Amy?
Well, thank you so much, Abby and Andrea. That was absolutely an amazing conversation and illumination of the situation. So I wanted to take a few moments to share with you more about the Women's Global Education Project and really how our programs relate to the themes in The Girl with the Louding Voice. And I just want to say right off the bat that Adunni reminds me of so many girls in our programs. And it's these stories that actually led me to start the Women's Global Education Project. Like Adunni, girls in our programs live in remote rural regions, often 200 kilometers or more from the capital cities of Dakar and Nairobi in Senegal and in Kenya. And since I founded the organization, we've served over 18,000 women and girls through our programs. And girls in the regions where we work, they face so many of the same challenges that Adunni faced in her novel. Families work as subsistence farmers with limited resources, and the boys are often chosen to go to school over their sisters. Girls often don't get the proper health education, so including resources for menstrual health, and are often expected to get married early. And of course, that leads to their dropping out of school. In addition to that, we see in Kenya the threat of FGM or female genital mutilation. So what our programs do is that we work with local partners and local activists in the communities that we work. And we address all of the barriers in order to create lasting change in the community, because there are so many reasons, right, as this book points out, why girls drop out of school and what's working against their success and retention in school. So the solution also has to be multifaceted. So it's not just, unfortunately, it's not just about providing a scholarship or building a school or a classroom, but really a combination of reinforcing interventions that involve the entire community to support a girl's education. So for example, a girl in our program could receive a scholarship to access secondary school, but then it's coupled with counseling and community meetings with her parents on the importance of education. To combat things like early marriage and early pregnancy, we provide intensive workshops on reproductive health, gender-based violence, and family planning. We also offer after-school clubs, and this is a place where boys and girls can talk about gender stereotypes and again, the importance of education. Girls in our program also attend mentoring workshops, and they see women role models in positions where then they can see themselves. So all of these things together, all of these interventions have what brought us a great success, and we're seeing a 99.3% retention rate of the girls in our program. So we're fortunate enough that despite the challenges of the pandemic, this last 18 months, our program is actually growing and serving even more girls. In March, we received a major investment by Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Square and Twitter, who donated $750,000 to our program through his initiative called Start Small. And in addition to that, we have similar great news. We are in the beginning stages of building a state-of-the-art library and computer center in rural Kenya. So this center will house 10,000 books and will definitely include the Girl with the Louding Voice, 25 computers, and this is in a region where no resources like this currently exist. So I wanted to let you know there are ways that for you to get involved today. You can support us through signing up and learning more. We send out a monthly newsletter, so the links are in the chat. You can contribute directly to our website to help support a girl's scholarship, or help us provide more resources for the library, or get involved in our capital campaign. Another thing that you can do is share information, like what you heard today from Abi and from Andrea on the importance of girls' education. So we're a really small organization, and we rely on individuals like you to get the word out about this cause. So now you can all take that with you. To that end, we wanted to end with a poem of one of our scholars in Kenya named Cynthia. So like Adunni, she has a very strong spirit, and she wrote this incredible spoken word poem called An African Tear. And it always makes me tear up each time I hear it. So I hope you'll enjoy it.
My name is India Gasheri, a beneficiary of the Tharaka Women's Welfare Program and the Women's Global Education Project since 2016 when I joined high school, and I have a poem to the program as a thanks. The poem is known as An African Tear. My African nature gives me my African stature. My African ability leaves me aiming higher and higher. My intelligent African brain gives me brilliant ideas every time. I draw and form structures. Structures to build my today. For I can't build my tomorrow without a better night today, since today is my foundation, my strength. I write, I draw, lay out and construct. This leaves my esteem so high, yet I fall, crack, and break into pieces. My voice is never heard, for everyone around here is busy working for a few coins that they take from their hands to their mouths. But now, things are different. I am a proud soul, for someone has got my back. The Tharaka Women's Welfare Program and the Women's Global Education Project have supported me. Socially, emotionally, spiritually, and even financially. Very few can take that initiative. The program has supported me by raising my self-esteem, by giving me free personal effects. They've also supported me by calling for meetings for me to be a better woman in the society. And not just a better woman, but a woman of substance in the society. All thanks to the program. I can see success coming my way. And this success will change my desperate tear into a tear of joy, into a bundle of joy. This day of success, I will tie a lasso around my waist and dance like a possessed African woman, because I will have power. The power to speak for the voiceless in the society, the power to help the poor girls in the society, and the power to spread humanity. All I need is support. The support to be that superwoman who fights for humanity. So join me and let's make a change, because I need you and you need me.
So I hope you enjoyed that poem from Cynthia. I wanted to bring Andrea and Abi back.
Did you hear as she was reciting that poem, all of the creatures that were in the background started out quiet, and as she raised the vibration with her words, they all started to sing with her. That's so remarkable.
She's amazing. She's amazing. I just wanted to thank Abi so much for writing this incredible, intense novel, and it's just making our life easier as we explain to people about the work that we do at Women's Global to support girls who are in those situations.
You do an incredible job. I was tearing up just listening to that. It's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Andrea, so much for the amazing conversation and for volunteering your time and your talent to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Absolute honor.
That concludes our program for the public event, and thank you all so much for joining us.